Hey everyone, welcome to the Dropbox webinar on why creative effectiveness unlocks impact that efficiency just can't deliver. My name is Morgan Brown. I'm the Vice President of Product and Growth for Dropbox Dash, our new AI product, and I'm really excited to be hosting this webinar today with you. I'm coming to you from California, but would love to know who's here on the webinar with us. So if you can drop your name and location in the chat, just be great to see where everyone's dialing in from. And I'm going to be your host today, and I have the extraordinary pleasure of hosting Geoffrey Colon. Geoffrey, welcome to the webinar. We're super excited to have you here, and just want to kick it over to you to do a quick intro, and then we'll dive in.
Great to be here. Thanks, Morgan, for inviting me. Yeah, I'm Geoffrey Colon, founder of Creative Studies, a 21st century holding company that includes a number of different uh, lines of business where we pretty much use Dropbox as our operating system. So, really excited to talk to you and everyone else about sort of all the possibilities now in front of us.
Amazing. Well, it's great to have you with us, and also a author. I love your book, and a lot of great insights on and marketing and where everything's headed in general. So excited to have you share your insights with our audience today. Before we dive in, though, just a few reminders for everyone on the webinar. First of all, this session is being recorded, so if you've registered for the webinar, you'll get a link to the recording at the end of it. If you have questions as we go through, please put them in the Q&A section and we'll answer as many as we can. At the end, we'll do rapid fire with Geoffrey before we wrap up. And then stay tuned. We have some special resources for you at the end of the webinar. So hang around for those so you can grab those before we wrap up. So with that, let's just dive right into it. Geoffrey, a lot of people talk about the importance of flow, of momentum, and I think that's just critical to doing, deep, thoughtful work. But what I would love to hear from you, what does that kind of creative momentum look like for you and in the work that you and your team do?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, or maybe I'm dating myself, maybe a decade ago, there was an author by the name of Cal Newport who talked about deep work. And deep work, I think for creatives, we've always worked this way, and we've had to adapt based on a lot of digital technology. Getting into flow is really immersing yourself in a craft where you're almost in a uh, like a higher state where you're sort of almost you almost don't want to turn off. If we think about jazz artists and musicians, they got into that state of flow when they were really like sort of feeling it. Poets, the same thing. It's the same sort of in creative work, a lot of creative digital work. You get into a um, sort of a transpired state where you're like, hey, I'm doing like my best work. I don't need any interruptions. I don't need any distractions. So I think a lot of us have been looking for, how does technology enhance that rather than detract from that state?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we definitely want to dig into how do you protect space to get to that state for sure. How do you know when you're in it? How do you know when you're kind of like clicking into that elevated state where things are just kind of, everything's right and you're kind of, jamming with the band, if you will?
Yeah, I think a lot of times you almost don't want to stop working. I know that sounds maybe a little antithetical to like, how people are always like, hey, you want to get work done as quickly as possible and move on. But, flow state, you're almost like immersed where you're like, this is so great. I almost want to continue to do it for as long as possible to get it right. A lot of people who actually code for a living will talk about this. They'll be like, oh, wow, I need to stop and actually maybe go eat.
Right.
Otherwise, that's going to get away from me. And I think a lot of creatives work this way. We hear stories of us working late hours or like late at night. There's a reason for that. It isn't to sort of say, hey, let me hustle harder than anyone else. You're actually in a flow state. You have less distraction. You're doing your best creative work possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts to feel more like play, if
That's
you
right.
if you will. Very
That's right.
cool. But we all have a ton of challenges to actually get there. I think, if we could all just flip a switch and hit the flow state, we would definitely sign up for that. But whether you're kind of, staring at a full inbox or a blank sheet of paper, or, there's there's a bunch of hurdles and challenges to try to like get into that state, get focused. I was wondering, obviously you run a very, like you said, I love it, a 21st century holding company with lots of different lines of business. What are some of the biggest challenges you and your team have faced trying to like get into that focused state and keep things moving?
Yeah, I think one thing is, in these decentralized models we work in, we have people who are geographically all over the world. They might speak different languages, or English is their second language. They have different skill sets, but they're trying to understand other people's skill sets. It's almost like the best analogy is when a team is brought together to work on, let's say, a feature film. The sound people are different from the people who are also operating the cameras, who are different from the people who are doing wardrobe, but they all have to understand each other's craft in a little bit so they can actually figure out what that final, piece looks like. That's really sort of like the way that we work in a modern sense of, creative studies. It's, okay, I have a motion graphics person. I'm not an expert in that, but I have to understand enough of that so that that can align with, the audio that we're going to put together. Um, and everyone sort of has to understand everyone else's place there. And a lot of that is also communication lines. People just use different tools. You don't want to say like, well, here's what we want you to use, because everyone's sort of a freelance sort of person that is brought in to then work as a larger collective. So it's always been difficult, I think, to find the best way to work until recently, when there's just been a lot more tools that have been developed that will help sort of these decentralized work structures.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You have to pull a lot of threads together to kind of get to that finished piece of work, and certainly very true in kind of any creative production across all sorts of different kind of teams and expertises and all of that. Let's talk a little bit about how you actually do that, because I think you talked about using Dropbox as an operating system for your business. So you've been a longtime Dropbox customer, I think since 2013, which is a heck of a run. We're super grateful for your business and for relying on us. But I'd really love to hear, and I think the audience would really love to hear too, how does Dropbox and Dash, the new AI tool that you've been kind of piloting for us and running, how does that fit into your daily workflow, and how does it help you kind of accomplish, pulling all that together?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like creative work that we're doing, we're still talking in the language of lots of files, lots of information. And in a larger enterprise company, if this was, let's say, a company of 50,000 people, there's still chaos that you have to bring order to. And it's interesting how, you talk to a lot of enterprise organizations and they'll say, oh, we have dozens or thousands of SharePoints, thousands of areas that we don't even know if we maintain them anymore, and there's no real semblance of order there. And I think what we've sort of realized with Dropbox, at least the work that we do, is, hey, how do we sort of structure or provide a taxonomy that it doesn't matter who's in the company or who's not in the company, we all can sort of find things, or we can all share things with one another. And I think the promise of what we found with Dash is, it's not just a matter of finding files, but like, how do we find conversations? How do we find messages? Especially because, Morgan, people are using different forms of communication across the board now. They might use email, they may use a messaging service, they may use messages that are intertwined with a larger social platform. They may have, you things that they keep sort of on their hard drive. They may have things they keep on, sort of a cloud server. There's things that are all over the place. There's not really one way of doing things. So I think what has been unique about this is, identify that workflow, no matter who that person is that you're sort of bringing into the fold to work on projects together. And in a lot of ways, Dropbox has been sort of this for lack of a better term, like this agnostic tool we've been able to use, even with people we bring in who are like, oh, I don't use this. I've never used it. The learning curve has been really, really quick for them. And I think we've actually turned on a lot of people to use it who maybe have never used it before.
Very cool. And for folks who are on the webinar that aren't familiar with Dash or haven't seen it yet, you can check it out at dropbox.com/dash. It's a AI powered universal search tool. Jeffrey was kind of sharing that you can search across all of your different connected sources, help you find answers, documents really quickly. Also has collaboration and some AI tools. But Jeffrey, I was wondering if you have maybe a recent project or something you were working on where Dash kind of helped you out and maybe what that kind of looked like so people can wrap their heads around it a little bit.
Yeah, we're shooting a pilot right now for a new show called Visionaries. And we've actually been shooting that in Los Angeles. I'm not in Los Angeles. I'm up in Seattle, Washington. So the team physically shot some coverage in Los Angeles. We've been sort of using Dash to conversate or communicate between myself as well as a number of editors that are down in South America and Colombia, to be specific. But then we're also having to communicate with others who are, I would say, the investors behind the show who are based in Abu Dhabi. So look at the global sort of reach of how we're working, and we're using all of this to sort of figure out, how do we bring this together in sort of a fluid motion? I wouldn't say it's a fast motion; it's more of a fluid motion, and that's been really, really helpful when you have, again, these decentralized teams that are geographically separated from one another. That's just sort of the use case in terms of how we've been using it, and it's been pretty awesome. There's been, less friction where less friction is needed, where, I'm spending less time having to send an email saying, hey, is the final version in this drive somewhere? I just now use Dash to go search for those things before I go then ask a question, which spends a lot of time that someone then has to reply and figure out everything else. So it's led to, I think, a really, really, for lack of a better term, agile motion amongst all these different working partners in different locations around the world.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that story. Yeah, it sounds like it helps you all be, effective, even if you're kind of, spread across around the world, like you mentioned. And then maybe one less notification kind of gives one more person, a chance to get into that flow state we were talking about earlier. But I want to kind of shift gears maybe a little bit. Obviously, there's a ton of buzz around AI. Obviously, the landscape is changing daily. There's lots of opportunity out there, but lots of also concern and potential pitfalls with AI, particularly as it relates to creative work. With so much noise right now, kind of in the AI space across these tools and trends, I think it'd be really tough for anyone, but effectively, creatives who are trying to balance, where these things plug into their work and where they protect kind of that the unique creativity that they bring. Like how do you help people think about like what's worth their time? And yeah, would love just your take on how you think about how these tools fit for your business and how you kind of stay productive without getting pulled into like every new shiny object that comes out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think the first one is always going back to the basics of what is it that we're trying to do and what's the problem there that we're trying to solve? And then how do we solve that problem? And then how does AI help solve for that problem? I think that's been more discussion around that as of late, especially in with the creative class in terms of what are we trying to solve for? How does that help solve for it? Whereas I think a lot of the initial conversations were, hey, we need to use this, but we don't know how we're going to use it. So people were really sort of starting with, that type of thinking or that logic, like, oh, let's use AI to solve for this. It's like, well, wait a minute, back up. What's the actual problem we're trying to creative solve for? I think there's more discussions now on that, and that's actually made the landscape a little bit more unique in terms of, okay, What are the tools that we're going to go use to help solve this problem? At the same time, though, Morgan, I think like how we work is really, really important. And that's been something that's been, I think, maybe ignored by a lot of people. It's almost like you have some organizations that'll just say, oh, hey, here's a shiny bright object, as you've noted. Let's use this. And you have people who are like, wait, did you study how we actually work around here, or how we aspire to work, I guess is the better way to phrase it. And people will sometimes be like, oh no, I guess we didn't really look at how we're organized. It's like, start there. Look at sort of how creative teams want to operate and then figure out what's the best workflow there, what's the best sort of solutions that that team can have, so they're actually enabled or empowered to go do really unique work. I don't know if we've had those conversations. I think they're starting to happen a lot more, which is why that excites me. I think in terms of people finally realizing, okay, we're actually approaching things from a solution standpoint rather than more of this. Okay, how can we integrate AI in this? That's maybe not the right question. The better question is, what are you trying to solve for? Oh, that tool could actually help. How is AI used in actually solving for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that really resonates and really trying to look, like you said, at the problem you're trying to solve. And there's a lot of work that happens to support the creative process, like you said, kind of coordinating schedules, getting things back and forth
Yes.
to one another. There's a lot of, kind of busy work that supports the development of this really unique work. But is if we can kind of streamline some of that, save some people some notifications, save a few email threads. Maybe there's more time for that deeper focused work that we talked about previously. I think the solution shift, focusing on solutions and kind of, sorry, focusing on the problems and really starting there before just, hey, taking this shiny object is a really great kind of mindset shift. I was wondering, is there another mindset shift or habit that your team has had lately that's kind of been a breakthrough for how you create work, how you get stuff done, and would love to know if there's any insight there to share with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is sort of what we're talking about today in terms of effectiveness. Like, I think there's been a lot more discussions as of late on what is going to be more effective rather than just the what's going to be more efficient. So it always gets into the deeper conversation of like, hey, how can we be effective and use efficiency? Whereas I think a lot of my conversations the last 2 years were really around hyper efficiency at scale. And a lot of times we would do things and then realize, wait a minute, maybe we just didn't have to even do this. It was it was not really being effective whatsoever. So there's been a lot more interesting conversations on asking like what can be most effective in terms of what we're trying to do creatively, and then okay, how can we be most efficient with that so that we can make sure we're not um, spending too much or being more cost effective, or not bogging people down in a lot of useless sort of meetings or sending people information that they don't need. So I think that mindset shift has really helped quite a bit in terms of, let's map both of those together and let's make sure we have the right tools to sort of get everyone thinking that way. So when we ask them questions at the end of the year or the end of every quarter, they're not just pointing to, hey, look at all the efficiency that I enacted around here. Because I think a lot of times I usually, my rebuttal to that is, did we even have to do that in the first place? Like, is that really effective for what we're trying to do here?
I think that's great advice, really asking why. I know we're just at about time, but maybe I can wrap up or kind of recap some of the things that I've learned today. I've heard from Jeffrey. Obviously, impact really comes from making that space to think that deep work that Jeffrey mentioned, and how to protect that time. Um, you know, Being efficient for efficiency's sake maybe is easy, but that's not really the end goal. Making work that resonates takes time, and we need to be able to clear those distractions, find that focus time, find that flow state to be able to deliver on that. And that flow time, that deep work time is the competitive edge. When your attention is split across multiple projects, across multiple Slack channels and email threads, it eats into that focus time, and protecting more of that is what keeps ideas flowing and great work moving. And then Jeffrey, I really appreciated his insights on how Dash helps kind of clear that mental clutter, harness that chaos that he mentioned, and having everything in one place kind of frees up that headspace, cuts out meetings, cuts out kind of the back and forth that kind of eats into that precious time. So that just means more time for creating the work that we all care so deeply about. So those were my takeaways. If you have a takeaway, I'd love to hear it in the chat. Just feel free to drop it in. I mentioned at the top of the webinar that we do have some resources for you. So if you'd like to grab any of these, you can just scan the QR codes that are up on screen right now. The first one is we put together a prompt library for folks in the creative field, marketing field, if there's, to help with, hey, specific prompts that you can give tools like Dash or other AI to help with some of the workflow effectiveness that Jeffrey mentioned in the webinar. So you can check those out. We also have a collection of all of the events that we've talked more about Dash if you want to learn how it can apply to your business. See other use cases, hear from other customers. You can check out those events. They're pre-recorded and available at that second QR code. And then we also have a self-guided demo. So if you want to see a little bit more about what Dash is all about, play with it yourself, you can check it out at the final QR code. And so with that, just want to say thank you so much to Jeffrey. Really enjoyed the conversation, and we will get ready to take all of your questions now. All right, Jeffrey. Well, here's the first question that we have. It was, what was the onboarding process for Dash like? So I'll kick that over to you and would love to hear your experience about getting set up.
Yeah, it was actually quite easy. I mean, it was a matter of registering, um, filling out some information, um, inviting others that you wanted to be, part of it, doing an account setup, and then sort of adding the apps that you wanted to be part of Dash. So, where you wanted basically Dash to work, across Slack, across, Gmail, wherever other areas you wanted it to function. And then I think the big part of it, is the educational part of any of this. And so a lot of resources that you guys offer, that you all offer, that we still take quite a bit of advantage of in terms of trying to learn, best practices, next practices, just how to, how to be better with, with this, with the software. So that's it was quite sort of easy if you take a tinkering mindset to it. And we're still not done, I think, in terms of trying to learn where we can go with it next.
Very cool. Yeah, hopefully onboarding is a non-event with the Dropbox products. So that's great. One of my favorite little Easter eggs for Dash is you can actually ask Dash what it can do, and it will tell you a bunch of stuff. So it has some of that education baked right into the prompting, which is kind of a fun little Easter egg that we buried in there. Second question for you. I think this is highly relevant for businesses of all kinds. I think people do it. We're kind of coming up on the end of the year. Everyone's looking at, hey, I've got all of these SaaS tech subscriptions. I'm subscribing to more and more stuff every month.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I'm kind of thinking about adding tools, really curious about, how difficult is this tool to adopt? And also how Dash stacks up to other AI tools. If you've played with ChatGPT or Copilot, yeah, how does it fit in? And then how's your team been at adopting it?
I think it enhances everything. What I would actually do at the end of each year, and we'll probably do this as well because we're moving into the last quarter of the year, is figure out sort of a subtraction plan. So, what do we not need and what can we sort of subtract, but also what makes sort of our work stronger. I think this tool it sort of pulls everything together and it allows us to do more with it. So that's definitely a tool that we're not going to subtract from that list. Whereas there may be a number of special tools that are out there within, people's AI stack that you might, people may say, is it worth sort of resubscribing to it? Always think it's good to do an annual audit, but this I think enhances things because it almost, I wouldn't say it replaces communication tools. It enhances all of the communication tools that we have. It simplifies it, makes it a lot easier for us to use. And it also interacts with a number of the, other large language models that are out there. So I think, we look at it as a complementary tool to allow us to do like a lot better focused work.
Very cool. Yeah, I think I'm always like Dash is great at finding needles in haystacks,
Yeah.
no matter where they live. So if it's Slack, if it's Gmail, if it's your calendar, if it's Dropbox, it's really helpful at doing that. Great. Maybe, obviously you are an early adopter of lots of things. You joined Dropbox very early on. Is there something about Dash that has kind of surprised you or helped where you maybe didn't immediately expect it, or kind of like stood out to you as there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was interesting is, I didn't think that we'd be in a world where more of us are moving to multiple calendar systems. So, you think about the fact that in the past, you probably had a work calendar and then your personal calendar. Now we have work plural calendars, and then we have personal plural calendars. And for those who are parents, you'll understand what I'm saying. It's not just your calendar that's a personal calendar. You have your kids, you have your significant other. Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting in terms of it was able to diagnose pretty much every one of my calendars and was able to sort of pull together what I needed to do to focus on that particular week and also what I could maybe move or maybe not have to attend in terms of meetings. So that focus is really key. I spend less time having to manually manipulate my calendars and more time just sort of, using Dash to figure out what's the best way to make this a little bit more impactful for me on a week to week basis. There's one thing that I learned in life. It's that if you don't take control of your calendar, someone else will, Morgan. So I think that's been really powerful.
Man, there's no truer words than that. I think that's a great spot to end it. I know we're right up at time. So, Geoffrey, thank you so much for your perspective, your insights. Thanks to everyone for the questions. Geoffrey, where can people find you online if they want to kind of learn more and keep in touch?
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn. You can also find me at creativestudies.agency.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you again. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar, for your participation. I think, in a world of AI, in a world of constant distraction, deep work is, kind of the antidote, is kind of the thing that we're all striving for. It's where we get to do our most impactful, enlightened, and hopefully most enjoyable work. So please stay in touch with us. Let us know how you're finding strategies to protect that time. And yeah, we hope to see you down the road at a subsequent event. So thanks everyone and have a great rest of your week.